Hello everyone, I'm here to tell you some scary stories, but in a way that helps you relax and fall asleep. If you enjoy these videos, don't forget to like and subscribe, it really helps a lot. Also, tell me in the comments where are you watching from and what time is it right now. Now take a deep breath, listen to the gentle sound of the rain, and let your mind drift into the dark, peaceful world of tonight's story. I never planned to end up here. If you had told me 10 years ago that I'd be living alone inside a century-old lighthouse, miles from the nearest town, talking to the fog, I would have laughed. But here I am, and I can still smell the salt on those stone walls, still hear the wind clawing at the glass of the lantern room, still feel that sick, humming pressure in my chest every time the fog rolled in. The story begins in October of 1976, the year I thought solitude would heal me. My name's Thomas Hale. Though if you ever looked up the records for Graves Point Light, you wouldn't find it. I was listed under a temporary contract with the Coast Guard, civilian watch assistant. That's what they called us when they didn't want to pay real keepers anymore. My father had died that spring. The mill I worked at shut down a few months later. I wasn't ready for anything or anyone, so when I saw that little ad in the Bangor Daily News, caretaker wanted. Graves Point Light, remote post, a room and board provided. It felt like an escape, a way to disappear for a while. The drive down the coast took hours. The road narrowed until it became a gravel path barely wide enough for my old pickup. Pines pressed close from both sides, and the ocean wind cut through the trees in long, cold sighs. When I finally saw the lighthouse, white paint peeling, glass dull with salt, it looked less like a refuge and more like a tomb. A man was waiting for me at the base of the tower. He wore a faded coat, and the smoke from his cigarette curled and vanished into the sea wind. "Halpin," he said, offering a thin hand. "Headkeeper." "You're the new one." "Thomas," I said. "Hale." He nodded, eyes flicking toward the horizon where fog was already building like a wall. "Moves in quick here," he muttered. "Best learn to like it." Inside, the air smelled of oil and salt. The living quarters were small. One cot, a metal desk, a stove, and a window that faced nothing but the endless grey Atlantic. The radio on the desk was old, crackling with static. "The automation handles most of the light's rotation," Halpin explained. "You'll just log the weather, run maintenance, and make reports every 6 hours. Midnight 6, noon 6 again. Simple enough." He lit another cigarette. "One thing, though. Fog gets thick. You'll hear things in it sometimes." "What kind of things?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Just stared at the window until the beam of the lighthouse swung past, briefly cutting across his face. "Just fog," he said finally. "It likes to play tricks." He left the next morning. When his boat disappeared into the mist, I realized how utterly quiet the place was. The silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, a kind of pressure behind your ears like you were underwater. That night I made my first report. Weather, overcast. Visibility, poor wind, east-northeast. The foghorn bellowed every 30 seconds. A lonely, dying animal somewhere out there in the grey. Around midnight, I was sitting at the desk, half asleep, when I heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow, measured, metal against stone. I froze. No one else was supposed to be here. The steps stopped just outside the door. I waited for a knock, a voice, anything, nothing. Finally, I stood, grabbed the flashlight, and opened the door. The spiral staircase wound downward into darkness. My light cut across the walls. Damp, rusted metal, nothing else. The footsteps had stopped, but I could still feel them and that sense of someone just having been there. "Hello," I called. My voice sounded small, ridiculous. The foghorn moaned again, deeper this time, like it was answering. When I returned to my desk, the radio dial had moved. Just a fraction, but enough that the static had shifted pitch. I was sure I hadn't touched it. The next morning was worse. The fog didn't lift, not even after sunrise. It pressed against the windows like something alive, swirling in slow circles. Every sound felt distant, muffled. Even the sea seemed quieter. I tried the radio again. Only static. I logged the weather manually and climbed to the lantern room to check the lens. Halfway up, I found a wet footprint on the stairs. Bare, human, facing downward. The tower was locked. No one could have entered without my key. Still, I followed the trail down to the service room. Nothing. The air was freezing, damp enough to sting. My flashlight beam caught tiny droplets floating mid-air, glimmering like dust. I don't remember going back up, but I must have, because I woke hours later at the desk with the radio still hissing. The clock said 3:12 p.m. My logbook was open to a blank page, except for one faint line written in pencil. Don't look at it when it calls your name. I didn't write that. That evening, the fog thickened until I couldn't see 5 feet outside. The light from the lantern spun uselessly in the grey. At 10 p.m. I heard the radio click. A voice, soft, low, almost human, broke through the static. "Thomas?" I felt every hair on my arms stand up. The next tape was worse. Daniel's tone was ragged, frightened. He spoke about footprints, voices, time lapses, the knocks from inside the walls. At one point there was a shriek, high and metallic, followed by the sound of running footsteps, then silence. I increased the volume, isolated the frequencies. Hidden under the white noise there was a low hum, steady, like breathing through a long pipe. When I adjusted the pitch, the hum formed words. "You looked when I told you not to." That's when I stopped the player and turned on every light in the studio. Tape 3, The Mirror in the Cabin. By the third tape, Daniel's sanity was unraveling. He talked about another cabin, a mirror image of his, and seeing himself inside it. He claimed his reflection was alive, autonomous. At one point he whispered, "He's learning to speak through me." The tape crackled, then split into layers of sound. Daniel's voice and something else, mimicking his words a fraction of a second later. I ran an audio spectrogram, hoping to spot background noise, but instead I saw a face. No exaggeration, the frequency map formed a rough, human shape, head tilted, limbs outstretched, eyes dark hollows. I blinked and it was gone. My monitor flickered, and the power briefly cut out. When the lights came back, I heard something in the hallway outside the studio. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks, just like he'd described. Tape 4. The last night. This one wasn't labeled properly. The ink had smeared like it had been wet. When I played it, there was no voice at first. Just silence and faint static. Then breathing, slow, rhythmic. And underneath, a faint ticking, like a clock running backward. Then Daniel's voice, distant, almost pleading. "If you're hearing this, don't look for me. I'm still here, just not on your side of the glass." A crash, shattering glass, and then, and a whisper, louder this time, directly into the mic. "It's your turn to watch." The tape ended abruptly. I sat there for a long time after that, frozen. The air in the studio felt wrong, too still. I checked the window. Fog was rolling in from the river. That shouldn't happen here. It was the middle of July. I went to the door to leave, but stopped when I saw something on the inside of the glass. Fingerprints, long, narrow, pressed from the outside. They trailed upward like someone had been climbing the window. Then the lights flickered. The radio console turned on by itself. Static filled the room, resolving into Daniel's voice, live, not recorded. "Ben, why did you play them?" My throat tightened. I whispered, "Where are you?" There was a pause. Then the voice answered, distant, echoing as if through miles of fog. "Behind you." I turned, and nothing. Just the fog pressed against the glass. But it was thicker now, swirling like it was alive. I backed away, breath shallow. The static grew louder, peaking until the speakers nearly burst. Through the distortion, dozens of voices whispered in unison. "Now you understand, epilogue." They found the studio empty the next morning. The tapes were still running, looping endlessly, replaying fragments of Daniel's voice. On the recording there's a final sound, faint and easy to miss if you're not listening for it. A second voice whispering over his, saying something that sounds like, "Welcome home. No one has entered that studio since." The fog hasn't lifted from the valley in weeks, and sometimes when the radio goes dead at night, you can still hear a voice, faint but clear, whispering through the static, "Don't look out the window." So I did. I pulled the blanket down and stared straight into the mirror. The figure in the glass began to move forward closer until its face pressed against the inside surface. Cracks spiderwebbed across the glass. I could see something behind the cracks, fog rolling endlessly, swallowing everything. My reflection lifted its hand. I felt mine move against my will. It smiled, and the voice, my voice, whispered, "It's your turn to watch." The mirror shattered. The sound was deafening. I fell backward, covering my face. When I opened my eyes, the fog had seeped through the cracks in the glass, spilling onto the floor like liquid smoke. It climbed the walls, curled around the furniture, reached for me. I backed into the corner, gasping, as the whispers turned into a single, unified voice. "Now you understand," then silence. I woke up the next morning with glass embedded in my palms, cuts across my arms, the floor dry and spotless. No fog, no voice. For the first time in weeks, sunlight filtered through the window. The air felt warm again. I thought maybe it was over. I even laughed, hoarse and delirious. But when I turned toward the wall, the mirror was whole again. Not a single crack, and in its reflection the room was empty. I wasn't there. When I first heard the tapes, I thought they were just another crank submission. People send strange things to the local radio station. Ghost stories, proof of UFOs, you name it. I'd been working late, digitizing old recordings from the archives when the box arrived. No return address, just my name written in shaky pen. For Ben, play them alone. Inside were 4 cassette tapes labeled simply DW, cabin logs, do not broadcast. I should have thrown them out. But the handwriting, had I recognized it? It belonged to Daniel Ward, a field journalist who'd gone missing 6 months earlier. I used to work with him. Tape 1, The Arrival. The first tape started with static, then a voice, Daniel's, calm and measured. He described driving deep into the mountains, renting an old hunting cabin for a story about isolation experiments. His tone was professional, journalistic, nothing supernatural. But as the recording went on, his voice began to change. He mentioned the fog. He said it followed him. Then came the whisper, faint like breath against the microphone. "Don't look out the window." I paused the playback. The hairs on my arms stood up, because when I rewound and played that part again, the whisper didn't sound like it was on the tape. It sounded like it came from behind me. Tape 2, The Whispering Nights. The next tape was worse. Daniel's tone was ragged, frightened. He spoke about footprints, voices, time lapses, the knocks from inside the walls. At one point there was a shriek, high and metallic, followed by the sound of running footsteps, then silence. I increased the volume, isolated the frequencies. Hidden under the white noise there was a low hum, steady, like breathing through a long pipe. When I adjusted the pitch, the hum formed words. "You looked when I told you not to." That's when I stopped the player and turned on every light in the studio. Tape 3, The Mirror in the Cabin. By the third tape, Daniel's sanity was unraveling. He talked about another cabin, a mirror image of his, and seeing himself inside it. He claimed his reflection was alive, autonomous. At one point he whispered, "He's learning to speak through me." The tape crackled, then split into layers of sound, Daniel's voice and something else, mimicking his words a fraction of a second later. I ran an audio spectrogram, hoping to spot background noise, but instead I saw a face. No exaggeration, the frequency map formed a rough human shape, head tilted, limbs outstretched, eyes dark hollows. I blinked and it was gone. My monitor flickered, and the power briefly cut out. When the lights came back, I heard something in the hallway outside the studio. 3 knocks. Pause. 2 knocks. Just like he'd described. This one wasn't labeled properly. The ink had smeared like it had been wet. When I played it, there was no voice at first. Just silence and faint static. Then breathing, slow, rhythmic, and underneath a faint ticking like a clock running backward. Then Daniel's voice, distant, almost pleading, "If you're hearing this, don't look for me. I'm still here, just not on your side of the glass." A crash, shattering glass. And then a whisper, louder this time, directly into the mic. "It's your turn to watch." The tape ended abruptly. I sat there for a long time after that, frozen. The air in the studio felt wrong, too still. I checked the window. Fog was rolling in from the river. That shouldn't happen here, as it was the middle of July. It said, "Stop following me." That's when I realized maybe I wasn't the one being watched anymore. Maybe I had become the thing that watched. The climax came on the 12th night. The fog came earlier than usual, curling through the cracks under the door like smoke. The air turned icy. My breath hung in front of me, suspended. And then I saw the figure again, standing inside the cabin this time, just beyond the living room doorway. The same featureless face, head tilted, listening. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper. It didn't answer. Instead, it pointed to the window. I turned and saw my own reflection in the glass. But it wasn't me. My reflection was smiling. Then it whispered, using my own voice, "You never left the fog." I don't remember when the mirror first changed. One morning I woke to find it covered in condensation, though the air was dry and cold. I wiped it clean and froze. My reflection was a split second late. When I blinked, it didn't. When I lifted my hand, its fingers twitched just a bit too slowly, as if waiting for permission. That was the moment I stopped trusting my own face. Days bled together after that. I barely ate, barely slept. The fog never lifted anymore. It clung to the cabin like a living skin, heavy and wet, muffling every sound except the faint hum of my generator. I started marking time by the number of candles I burned each night. Every evening, I'd sit in front of the mirror with my recorder, trying to prove to myself that I was still here. "This is day 17, I'd whisper into the tape. "If anyone finds this, don't come here. Don't look into the fog." Then I'd replay the tape, and sometimes there'd be another voice layered beneath mine. Not overlapping, she responding. The first clear message came on day 20. I'd recorded myself saying, "Who are you?" When I played it back, a voice and low rasping to answered, "You were here before." That night I tore the mirror off the wall and left it face down on the floor. But when I woke up the next morning, it was hanging back where it belonged, spotless, as though nothing had happened. Around that time I began losing chunks of time again. Hours, sometimes half a day, gone without memory. My notes became disjointed, handwriting changing mid-sentence, tone flipping from calm to frantic. In one entry I wrote, "I saw myself outside the cabin last night, standing in the fog, smiling. When I opened the door, he walked away into the woods, and I followed. But now I think I never came back." When I read that line the next morning, I felt something cold crawl through my chest. I checked the tape recorder. New audio, one I didn't remember recording. My voice, but slower, slurred. He's learning to speak through me. That day I went into the forest. I thought maybe I could confront it, prove that it was just exhaustion, isolation, whatever. I packed the recorder, a lantern and a knife I never used before. The fog was almost luminous, swirling in pale ribbons. Every few steps I'd hear whispers, soft and rhythmic, repeating my name, Daniel. It came from all directions at once. I started calling back, half in anger, half in desperation. "What do you want?" The whispers paused. Then one voice, in the same tone as mine, took a call to go home. The trail disappeared after half a mile. Trees bent in unnatural ways, branches forming arches like open mouths. I came upon a clearing I'd never seen before, and there at the center stood another cabin, identical to mine, the same porch, the same broken lantern, even the same curtains fluttering behind the glass. I should have turned back, but I walked forward, heart hammering. The door creaked open as if it had been waiting. Inside, everything was reversed. The furniture, the photos, even the clock, mirrored perfectly. And in that mirrored cabin, I saw him. He was sitting in the chair where I usually recorded my tapes, head tilted, eyes hollow and unfocused. My reflection, my copy, looked up as I entered. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I live here," I answered, trembling. He smiled, the same too-wide grin from the window reflection. "No," he whispered. "You lived here." Then the lights went out. When I came to, I was back in my real cabin, or what I thought was real. The fog outside was glowing faintly, like moonlight underwater. The mirror, back on the wall again, shimmered as though breathing. And there was a shape inside it, darker than my reflection, closer. It moved when I didn't. I tried covering it with a blanket, but the whispers came immediately, as louder than ever. "Face it," they said. "Face yourself." The nights grew colder. It wasn't just the temperature. It was as if the fog itself carried a damp intelligence that pressed against my skin, watching, learning. The wind through the trees had a rhythm now, almost human. I'd never been a paranoid man, but isolation can rewire your instincts. You start noticing things you shouldn't. The first whisper came on the 5th night. It was around 2 a.m. I couldn't sleep. The forest outside seemed to pulse with life. Then I heard it. A faint voice, low and close, like someone breathing words through the cracks in the wall. "Don't look out the window," that's what it said. I froze. For a full minute I couldn't even blink. My body refused to obey. The voice wasn't loud. It didn't even sound threatening. It was gentle, almost protective. But when you live miles away from anyone else, a whisper in your bedroom feels like a gun pressed to your temple. The rational part of me kicked in. I told myself it had to be the wind, a trick of acoustics. Maybe the logs were settling. Maybe my mind was tired. So I did what any desperate man would. I looked out the window. The fog was thicker than ever. The trees looked skeletal, their branches clawing at the sky. And then I saw movement, a shape, tall, motionless and wrong. It wasn't walking or swaying like a person. It was tilting, bending slightly as though testing how far its form could go before breaking. When it tilted far enough, it snapped upright again, faster than my eyes could track. I stumbled back, slamming the curtain shut. The voice returned, softer this time. You shouldn't have looked. The following morning, I tried convincing myself it was sleep deprivation. I brewed coffee, chopped wood, anything to feel normal. But there was something else. Footprints. They began right outside the porch, leading from the fog line to my door, barefoot, human-sized. But the toes were too long, arched like claws dragging through the mud. And worse, they stopped exactly where I had been standing last night. I called the local sheriff. The signal was patchy, but I managed to get through. He didn't sound surprised, just tired. People hear things in those woods, he said. Fog carries sound strange. Stay inside at night, close your windows. It'll pass. He hung up before I could reply. That night, I bolted the doors and covered the mirrors. I don't know why, instinct maybe. I read somewhere that mirrors can reflect things you aren't supposed to see. When the darkness deepened, I heard it again, whispering layered this time, like several voices murmuring at once. I couldn't make out the words until one phrase repeated, clear and sharp. Leave the lights off. Every lamp in the house flickered, then went dead. Even my flashlight dimmed to a pale orange glow. The air thickened. I could feel the fog pressing against the walls, searching for cracks. And then, the knocking began. Not at the door, but from inside the walls. 3 knocks. Pause. Then 2. It sounded deliberate, like a code. I pressed my ear to the wall. I swear I heard breathing on the other side. I ran outside. The fog swallowed me whole. The forest had changed. Every tree looked identical. Every sound echoed from everywhere. Somewhere ahead, a shadow flickered between the trunks. Not running, not walking, gliding. My flashlight caught it for half a second, and what I saw shattered whatever courage I had left. It wasn't a person. It had the rough outline of one, but its head was tilted too far, its neck impossibly long as if stretched by unseen hands. Its limbs jerked when it moved, puppet-like. The face, pale, featureless, except for a faint indentation where the eyes should be. And then it spoke. From no mouth at all. You looked when I told you not to. I don't remember running back to the cabin. When I came to, I was on the floor, mud streaked up to my knees. The whispers had stopped, but the silence was worse. I turned on the generator, but it only sputtered and died again. Every shadow in the room seemed to lean toward me. I found my old tape recorder, the one I used for field notes. I pressed record. I thought maybe if I documented it, I could make sense of it later. That was the first of many recordings. Over the next week, I filled 4 cassettes with rambling confessions, night sounds, strange static. Sometimes I'd play them back and hear voices that weren't mine. By the 10th night, I started noticing time gaps. I'd wake up in different rooms, mud on my feet, clothes damp, the front door ajar. One morning I found a note on the table, written in my own handwriting but not with my pen. At 3 a.m., the foghorn fell silent, just stopped. That sound had been the pulse of the place, and its absence was worse than the noise itself. Without it, the air felt hollow, too still. Then faintly I heard the same 3 knocks again, this time from the metal door downstairs. When I opened it, there was nothing. Only the fog, rolling in waves across the cliff. But I could smell something new, kerosene, and when I looked up, I saw the lantern above me flicker twice, then die, total darkness. I scrambled inside for matches, found none, then realized the glow from the stove was enough to see by. That's when I noticed it, the footprints wet and bare, leading from the door straight to the cot. I followed them. On the pillow lay the torn grey cloth I'd found outside days ago, only now it was dry and folded neatly, as if placed there by a careful hand. Inside it, A rusted brass tag stamped with a number. Bune 47, Halpen's employee number. I don't remember the next few hours clearly. Somewhere between fear and exhaustion, I began to talk, to the fog, to the empty room, to whoever was listening. I read aloud from the old logbook, every broken sentence, hoping maybe it would make sense of things. But the longer I spoke, the louder the echoes became until my own words came back to me, distorted like a crowd repeating after me from far below. It wants another. It wants another. Another. I slammed the book shut. The echoes stopped, then footsteps again. Only this time I saw the source. At the base of the stairs stood a man, or what had been a man. His skin looked grey, his eyes clouded with salt. He was soaked through, but no water dripped from him. "Halpen," I whispered. He lifted a trembling hand and pointed toward the window. The glass pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. Outside the fog swirled, and in it faces moved, hundreds of them rising and falling like waves. "Don't look when it calls," Halpen rasped. "That's how it sees you." Before I could speak, he was gone, vanished like mist. The air where he'd stood was colder than ice. The next day I tried to signal the mainland. The radio wouldn't transmit. The generator failed twice. By afternoon, the fog had thickened into a living wall, and through it came music, an old tune, faint and warped like a phonograph underwater. It drifted around the tower, circling, until it faded into low whispers. I recognized the melody. It was the same lullaby my mother used to hum. I went to the window. Shapes moved in the mist, shadow figures tall and thin, their outlines stretching with every sweep of the beam. They weren't walking. They were floating. And beneath the sound of the sea, I heard something worse. A heartbeat. Not mine, not human. It thudded once for every rotation of the light, shaking the glass. That night I dreamt of drowning. The sea wasn't water, but fog, thick enough to choke. Voices bubbled around me, people calling my name, begging me to look at them. When I refused, the water turned black, and from the darkness a single hand reached out. I woke, gasping, the taste of salt in my mouth. My bedsheet was damp, as if I'd been lying in seawater. At dawn, I packed a small bag. I'd had enough, but when I opened the door, the world outside had vanished. No cliff, no sea, no sky, only a white nothing stretching in every direction. Somewhere inside it, a voice whispered, "You can't leave until someone takes your place." The door slammed itself shut. I don't know how long the fog held me after that. Hours, days, maybe weeks. The clock stopped. The logbook's ink refused to dry. I spoke less and listened more, and the more I listened, the more the whispers began to sound like thoughts in my own head. One night, the radio came alive again, crackling with familiar static. "Thomas Hale, report your weather conditions." A human voice. A real one. "Coast Guard frequency." I nearly cried. "Visibility 0, fog continuous. Request extraction." "Copy that," the voice replied. "Boat dispatched from Winter Harbor. Hold position." Relief flooded through me, until the radio hissed and the same voice, now lower, slower, said, "Unless you'd rather stay." The connection died. Outside, the fog throbbed once like it was breathing with me. "Who is this?" Static again. Then quieter. "Come outside." My throat went dry. I stared at the radio, waiting for more, but the sound had vanished. I went to the door anyway, maybe some fisherman stranded in the fog, maybe Halpern testing the line. But when I stepped out, I realized how total the darkness was. The beam from the lighthouse cut through the mist, and for an instant I saw a figure on the rocks below, not moving, just standing there. It vanished when the beam swung back. That night, I barely slept. Every few minutes the foghorn would groan, the radio would crackle, and I'd swear I heard footsteps circling the base of the tower. At dawn, I went outside. The fog had finally thinned, revealing the jagged rocks below. No footprints, no sign anyone had been there. But near the base, where the surf hit hardest, I found a torn piece of cloth, grey, soaked, frayed at the edge. It looked like it had come from a uniform. I brought it inside and left it by the stove to dry. The smell of salt and rot filled the room. By noon, I realized I could hear something else, a faint rhythmic tapping coming from inside the walls. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't random. It had a pattern, almost like Morse code. I dug out an old reference chart from the logbook. If I was right, the sequence spelled just one word: look. By the third night, I started to lose track of time. The fog never left. The sun barely rose. My coffee tasted like metal, and I swore the air itself hummed. I could hear the waves through the floorboards, as if the sea was breathing beneath me. That's when the voice came again. "Thomas," it whispered through the static. "He's still here." I grabbed the radio mic. "Who is this?" "Who's still here?" "The one before you." Then silence. I tore through the drawers until I found Halpin's old logbook. Most of the entries were routine. Visibility low, lens cleaned. But the last one, dated September 12, 1976, said only, "He's in the fog now." It wants another. I felt every hair on my arm stand up. By the fourth night, I'd stopped marking the weather. What was the point? The fog had become permanent. Morning, noon, or midnight, it never lifted. Light from the lantern didn't shine anymore, it bled. A pale cone that reached out a few feet, then drowned in the gray. I was sitting at the desk, half listening to the static when something new crept into the hiss. Breathing, slow, steady, so close it could have been coming from the other side of the glass. I turned the dial, nothing changed. Just that faint inhale, exhale. Then a whisper. "You shouldn't have taken his place." The voice was right against my ear. I slammed the radio off and backed away. The foghorn moaned once, long, mournful, and in the silence that followed I heard footsteps again, this time above me. Circling the lantern room, I grabbed the flashlight and climbed. Each step groaned beneath my boots. Condensation dripped from the iron rail. Halfway up I smelled smoke, faint and stale like a burned-out match. When I reached the top, the lantern room was empty, but the air shimmered, as if the light itself were vibrating. On the inner glass of the lens, written backward in wet condensation, were 3 words, "Don't turn around." I spun instantly and saw no one. Just the fog, pressed tight against the panes. I slept for maybe an hour. Dreams, or something like dreams, came in bursts. A figure standing at the foot of the bed, a hand sliding across the floorboards, a voice humming through the vents. When I woke, the radio was on again, even though the switch was still in the off position. A woman's voice, soft, broken, whispered through the noise. "Tommy, it's me." For a second, I couldn't breathe. That was my mother's voice. She'd been dead for 12 years. "Mom, come outside, sweetheart." Just for a moment. Her tone was exactly right, the tremor, the warmth. I almost reached for the door before another sound cut in. A low rhythmic knock from the floor beneath the desk. Knock. Pause. Knock, knock, knock. I lifted the plank. It was loose. Below it, wrapped in oilcloth, was another logbook. Older, the pages swollen with damp. The first entry was dated August 1964. The name on the cover, Halpin. Most of the pages were unreadable. The ink bled by moisture, but the parts that remained sent a chill through me. The fog doesn't move with the wind anymore. Voices at night sound like the ones I lost. Keeper before me walked into the sea. If you hear your own name, close your eyes. It can't stand not being seen. I stopped there. The lamp hissed beside me. My own heartbeat filled the room. Outside, the fog thickened until the window pane rattled. And then, through that dense grey, I saw a shape. It stood where the rocks met the surf, tall and narrow, almost human but not quite. Its head tilted like it was listening. Each time the beam swept across it, the shape was closer. Step, pause, step. The sea didn't touch it. The waves broke around it. By the time I found the courage to blink, it was gone. As an adult, this story doesn't really scare me anymore, but I would be lying if I said it doesn't bug me to this day. Back in 2015, when I was about 10 years old, we had recently moved to a small suburban neighborhood where our new house was being constructed. My father was working in a different country, so my mom, sister, and I rented a temporary house until the new house was finished. Both these houses were in the same neighborhood and walking distance from each other. Truth be told, I never really liked the rented house. It wasn't creepy or anything, but it always seemed isolated. Nobody within a 2 or 3 house radius seemed to stay longer than a few months, and it never gave me the homely vibe. Something about the house just rubbed me the wrong way. Maybe I just missed my old house? Over the next few weeks, we did get adjusted to the house, and I didn't really mind it anymore. But being a decently sized house, a kitchen, dining room, and living room downstairs and 3 bedrooms upstairs, if I yelled for my mum from my bedroom, she wouldn't be able to hear me if she was downstairs. So I was always cautious of being alone in any room. I know, I seem like a paranoid guy, but I turned out to be right, coming to the incident. About 2 months in, during summer vacation, I invited 3 of my close friends over for a sleepover. We had fun all day and decided to end the night with a horror movie, Ouija 2014 to be specific. We turned off all the lights, drew all the curtains, pulled an old mattress onto the floor and played the movie. My sister and mom had gone to bed an hour ago. If you watched the movie, you would know that in the beginning itself, there is a scene where the sister of the protagonist is home alone when the power goes out and only a single light flickers. A few seconds later, she is possessed by an evil spirit and kills herself. Not exactly the Starry Night of horror films, but hey, we were kids. Now I shit you not. And I can have the other 3 guys attest to this as well. As soon as that scene ended, the power went out and the whole house turned pitch black at 1 a.m. in the morning. Oh, scary, right? I bet we could make a movie out of this. Anyways, we found it funny, hilarious actually. Power cuts, although infrequent, were not uncommon in the neighborhood, so guys being guys, we burst out laughing. We tried scaring each other by grabbing at each other's arms in the dark, and not a moment later, our hearts dropped. I still remember that sound. The sound of an old fluorescent light bulb slowly coming to life from behind us. My friends were scared, but I was terrified. I remembered that light bulb. We had a handyman come check it out, and he said that when the entire wiring of the house was redone, they never bothered connecting this bulb back to the circuit. Wasn't really required anymore, so they cut it off, the handyman claimed before moving on to the next room. And since we were just short-term tenants, we didn't really bother with it either. So there we were, in a pitch-black house with just a single light bulb flickering, just like in the movie. A second passed, and then another one. Noon could move, Noon could speak, it was dead silent. And then finally we screamed. A scream that ripped through the silence of that night. My mom and sister, bewildered, came racing down the stairs. They were asleep, but they heard us. Our neighbors would have heard us too if we had any. By the time they reached the living room, we were running away, as far away as we could get from the light. I needed to get out, away from that light, away from the house. I lunged at the main door and had just cracked it open when my mom came up from behind and slammed it shut. She was pissed. If my friends weren't there, I would definitely have gotten a smack across the face. It took a while, but the power finally came back. Once my sister managed to calm us down, we went to the dining room and explained everything, to the last detail. My mom just stared back at us, dumbfounded. She did see the light flickering, but assumed it was a prank by one of us, boys being boys. The light had never worked before, even when there was power, yet somehow both of them thought we had something to do with the flickering light. After an hour of arguing, we decided to give up and just went back to our rooms to sleep. None of my friends spoke through the night. We were all wide awake, but too afraid to speak. After what felt like an eternity, morning came and my friends' parents were back to pick them up. We said our customary goodbyes and they left, leaving me alone. The only person left in the house who knew something was wrong with the house. Days passed. I was still pretty shook up and stopped going to the living room by myself. Eventually you do learn to move on, but then it happened again. While my sister and I were at the local market, my mum was alone at home when the power went out again. And the light, it came to life again, flickering just like that day. My mother, being the devout Christian she is, thought it was a miracle. She called it God's light, since it provided light within the darkness. She would claim that there was a presence protecting us, but I refused to believe that. My sister, too, refused to believe that, but that was only because she still thought I had something to do with it. Anyways, over the year, we had our share of power cuts, and every single time that single light bulb would come to life. And it started from the night I had my sleepover. It started with that very scene in the movie. My friends never came over again, and I knew better than to ask them. Everyone we told brushed it off as a prank, but my mum continued to believe it represented something divine. I knew better. There was something off about that house. Something within it was mocking me every time that light would flicker. Perhaps it wasn't necessarily evil, but whatever it was had no business of being there. Once the new house was finished, I put the entire incident behind me. Some of the guys from that night would bring it up once in a while, but the conversation would always end in an uncomfortable silence. Over the next few years, my friends and I went our separate paths and then finally left for college. I haven't spoken to them in years, but I know that they remember that night. They felt what I felt. I just graduated college a few days ago, and was back home when I decided to go for a walk. I came across the old house the same as it was 10 years ago. It looked like someone was living there, but I wouldn't dare go inside. When I was 7 years old, just on the cusp of memory and soft imagination, my mother, sister and I moved into a very strange place. I remember a lot of pieces of my childhood. Like flashes out of the corner of my eye, I can so nearly make out the moments that defined my younger years. Many memories of the trailer my family moved to are hazy. Some more memorable, like birthday parties or particularly big storms. And other memories are more faint, like the sound my sister's door curtain made when you walked through it. She has this curtain made of strings of purple plastic beads that hung in her doorway. This was a trend in the 90s, and although faint, it's a sound that haunted my dreams. My grandparents lived across the street and down a long driveway in a 2-story farmhouse, aged by the solid whitewashed brickwork that made up the walls. Sturdy and filled with large wooden-framed windows, the home sat beside a large barn where my grandfather stored hay and farm equipment. In hindsight, it makes sense why my mum would have jumped at the opportunity to live in the old rundown trailer. She was a real estate agent at the time, and the mobile home setting was a step down from the home we had lived in before. However, being a recently single mother with 2 children and a third on the way, she must have figured my grandparents would be a huge resource in helping take care of us kids. And they were. I've been finding it strange how memories can be sharp and at the same time have no structure or foundation in reality. Like a funhouse mirror exploding in slow motion, I can remember a foam Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle staff I got for my 8th birthday in that house. I remember the sound effects it made when you swing it, or the crash sound when I hit my sister with it. But for some reason I just can't remember what the kitchen looked like. I remember how big the windows were at my grandma's house, the high ceilings with glass running from crown mold all the way to the floor, and the solid, quiet wooden boards underfoot. My grandparents' home was beautiful, and I can't for the life of me remember what it looked like after it burned down later that year. At the beginning of September this year, I stopped smoking weed and overall I feel fine. The one thing that caught me off guard though was that in my sobriety, I was having dreams again. I was shocked to realize how long it had been since I had long detailed dreams that I remember. I was so excited after my first dream-filled night. I thought about the dream I had all day and relished in telling my girlfriend all about it. It wasn't until I had the dream I've had hundreds of times in my childhood that I regretted my new ability. It's puzzling how something can be forgotten and somehow still exist somewhere deep down inside of one's self. When I was a kid, I remember having night terrors on a regular basis. I hadn't remembered the dream so much as waking up terrified and running to my mom's room, or being shook awake by my mother or sister because I was screaming. At times I had even had sleepwalking episodes. It wasn't until talking to my older sister this week that I knew those dreams only persisted as long as we were in that house. And I wasn't the only one in our small family who was tortured in that house. There was a plastic Fisher's Price playhouse about 30 yards into the forest behind a thicket right behind the house. My sister and I would spend time playing games and exploring around the little plastic house. As an adult now, I know that house must have been too small for my sister and I to both fit inside of. However, I can vividly remember the 2 of us sitting cross-legged in the plastic house, my sister telling me a scary story, and finally me running home in the lowly lighted thicket to tell my mum that Alice is trying to scare me. Later that night, I remember the sirens filling up the night air and the panic I felt not understanding all the lights and how something could be so loud as the fire truck. My mother gathered us up and took us across the street to my grandparents, and as we made our way down the long driveway to the still standing beautiful farmhouse, I watched the firemen running to meet the rapidly growing orange glow coming from the thicket next to our house. My sister was blamed for the fire that had burned up the plastic Fisher Price playhouse, as well as a 1/4 acre of the surrounding woods. Not to mention nearly burning our house down in the process. A void formed between my mother and my sister around this time, and from my childish point of view, my sister hated my mom. What I hadn't realized then, that I am beginning to wrap my head around today, is that my sister didn't burn down the plastic house in the woods, and she didn't burn down my grandparents' house either. Although at the time those facts were far from apparent. My mother and sister haven't been close for as long as I can remember. They would get in screaming matches a few times a year, and the cops would even get called a few times, never ending in an arrest. Once my sister was 16, she moved away from home, got married, and lived her life. A few short years later, I left home with plans to do the same. And once my grandmother passed, we all drifted apart and life kind of just went on. When I called my sister to ask about the dream I had last week, was the first time we had talked in the last year. The things we talked about shattered the doors to memories that had been locked away for the last 20 years. She was 3 years older than me, and about 5 years more mature than I was when we moved into the trailer across from my grandparents. The wavy, dreamlike recollection that I had during those times are far from the ones she held on to. She told me that Mom was in a bad place at the time emotionally, that I was just too young to recall. We stayed with our grandparents more than I had remembered, while our mom was out doing whatever it was she was doing. Most of all, though, that there was something wrong with that house. We talked for hours, and I was beginning to be able to see beyond my rose-colored glasses I had worn before. "You had those dreams every single night," she had said. My sister told me that I would scream, thrash around, and even get up and creep around the house just like I had some memory of. But it wasn't just me. Alice had been tormented in that house as well, not in dreams but in the waking moments between them. When I asked her what she meant, she sort of trailed off as if she didn't know how to explain the feeling. It was like the house hated us, and everything was just wrong. Everything was just all wrong. When we ended our call, my mind raced, studying every shiny bent shard of memory of that place, like she said it was wrong. Something about that place in time was just bad. I wish there was a more elegant way to put it. The very thought of that piece of my childhood made me nauseous. It was all because of this dream. It was a place I had been, and a setting I felt very familiar with, although filled with dread. Crippled with nostalgia, as I stood in my Alice's childhood room, staring through the bead curtain, otherwise shiny bulbs tinted brown in the dull darkness. My view into my doorway from here was more than enough to send me directly back to 7 years old. I knew there was something in that room, my room. I also knew I had to get past my room to get to my mother for help. But that whatever or whoever was in my room would never allow me to make it to home base. The sound of those light plastic beads clattering around my shoulders has never faded from my mind. When I awoke, I knew I had lived in this dream for years, a lifetime ago. I hadn't asked Alice about the fires. I knew she had been assumed to be the cause, and also knew it was a very touchy subject for our still tender relationship. It was time to talk to my mother. Things weren't adding up to me. If we had lived in a haunted house, why hadn't she moved us? And why have we never spoke about it? I didn't remember my grandparents' home burning down, and would at least dig more into the topic. My mother was different than she was when we were kids. In her older age, she spent her time working with her students and decorating her yard. We had stayed close, or at least closer than her and Alice, to say the least. She was hesitant to really open up about that place, that house, and not sure what to do with the knowledge I have at this point, or knowing what happened to us there. She said I was right. That place was bad, and everything felt very wrong there, almost patronizing me in that annoying mom way. But got more serious as she began to describe our situation. We were poor honey. Mom and Dad had more than enough space and help to offer us, and I needed all the help I could get with you kids. She had been in an abusive relationship with my younger brother's dad, whom she was pregnant with when we moved into the house. That had been a trick of the mind. I hadn't remembered my younger brother living at that house with us at all. My mother told me about how that house seemed to affect us kids, that we all acted sort of off, and how my sister most notably became very reclusive and just generally acting bizarre. She had described the time to feel dreamlike, almost like the period was out of place in her memory. "What about the fires?" I asked. My mother was quiet, almost refusing to acknowledge their rightful places in the timeline. As I waited for what felt like forever, she stammered across her words. I could feel the regret in them. "We thought your sister set the fires. She had just become so mean there was something evil rubbing off on all of us. You two had been out in the woods, and she was trying to scare you with some awful story she heard at school like she always was. I scolded her, and she hid away until after dinner and just went to bed. When the woods were on fire, your sister was the only reasonable culprit in my eyes. When your grandparents' house burned down, I didn't want to believe it, but I knew it had to be her. Through the sleepless weeks before, and the sleepless weeks that followed, it all just made less sense, sleepless nights. I asked before she went on to explain. Between my night terrors and all the sounds she heard outside of that house on a regular basis, she would often stay up with me and watch movies with the sound too high. My mother is a tough woman, but I could tell she was becoming emotional. Your sister didn't burn anything. I was wrong and I ruined our relationship because I hadn't trusted her word. But I got you two out of there safe. Before I could say anything, she continued, "Your younger brother's dad was a bad man. He followed us from Kentucky and stalked us for about 3 years. He burned down the woods where you kids played, and he burned down my parents' house. That entire time we lived there, we were being haunted. By him, by that monster." She was sobbing now, and I was out of words. Before any came to me, she continued, "When Mom and Dad's house burned down, your sister told me she saw Brad looking at her through her window. She said she had been saying Brad was outside, looking in her windows for weeks. I was mentally strung out and about to have your brought here. At the time, I had no capacity to believe anything she said or did. But she was right. I've never forgiven myself for not believing her. The next day, I got you kids together, and we went to your dad's house in Virginia. My mother told me after we left that house, it burned to the ground. Nobody was ever arrested. Brad had vanished off the face of the earth. My mother told me Brad had killed himself on my brother's 5th birthday. He was a very sick man, one whose face I can't remember, but haunts my dreams still. Some folks are haunted by memories, others by guilt. A few folks out there are haunted by ghosts, and the very unfortunate few haunted by the living need not dream. Back in May 2024, I'd 32F recently been let go from a job due to company downsizing. But I was getting paid severance, as well as had a good portion of money saved up in my retirement fund, so I was taking a small break before picking up another job. My best friend, 28F, had just inherited a car from her family back in California, and she wanted to fly back there to pick it up and drive it back New Orleans. She also missed home and wanted to spend around 2 weeks in Cali before driving back across the States for another 2 weeks, so we could take time to see some sights along the way. And since I was job-free and had never seen Cali before, she asked if I'd want to join her on the road trip. Even offered to cover my plane ticket, hotel Airbnb stays and the gas, so all I'd have to pitch in with is my own food. I thought that was really overly generous, but she assured me that it literally wasn't going to put a dent on her funds since she had a ton saved up and was well off. She just thought, for one, she'd feel safer going on a road trip with a trusted friend. Plus, it would be a fun friend trip for the both of us. So I agreed. As someone who was born and raised on the East Coast, I thought Cali was a huge change and pretty amazing. Loved the fresh air and the lack of intense humidity. After collecting the car, we started driving east through Nevada, then Utah, then ended up in Wyoming. Right after crossing the Wyoming border, we stopped for gas and some snacks. We weren't hungry enough to stop into the diner next to the gas station. My friend loves photography, though, and wanted to pull up to the Wyoming Welcome Center across the street to take a picture of the surrounding cliffs and the railroad that was cutting through the lower canyon. Let me paint you the picture. Aside from the small gas station and diner across the street, and the little Welcome Center across from them, with the Welcome to Wyoming sign, this area was pretty empty. It was only us parked at the Welcome Center, and about 2 cars parked at the diner across the street. While my friend went to snap pictures of the canyon and railroad, I stayed in the car to lounge because I wasn't feeling great. I get hit with vertigo spells and migraines and was trying to rest it off. But out of nowhere, this guy saunters up behind her. Didn't call out when approaching her to alert her of his presence. Only said something when she whipped around and saw him. Even though I was reclined in the passenger seat of the car, I sat up immediately. I couldn't hear what the guy was saying to her, and she was just responding as calmly as possible to what he said, but made a slight hand signal to me in the car. I grabbed the keys out of the ignition because it was the only weapon I had available, and got out of the car. Plus, I didn't want to risk him bolting for the car and driving off with it. When I got out of the car, the guy looked surprised to see me there, and his entire demeanor seemed to grow shifty. "Hey, what's up?" I asked, direct but casual. He said he was just wondering if she could help him take a picture of him with his phone by the Welcome to Wyoming sign by the road. Now, my friend or I could have said, "Nah, sorry," but you really never know how someone is going to react to being told no. He had a hand in his pocket, and I really couldn't tell if he was holding a weapon out of sight or not. As crazy as it seems, we agreed to help him out. While she played nice girl and chatted with him on the way to the sign, I followed closely behind them both to watch him. The entire way towards the sign, the guy kept faltering in his steps like he was trying to slow down enough until we were ahead of him. But I didn't allow that. I would just stop and wait until he kept walking. He never looked back at me, but he was acting tense and fidgety. I had the car keys between my fingers, just in case I might have to jab him if he lashed out at a moment's notice. I also glanced at the diner across the street to make sure we stayed in view of it, though one never knows if people will actually assist or if they'll just go into bystander mode, so I had to stay alert. After all, if anything happened, it wasn't like law enforcement would appear out of thin air to resolve an issue. The entire time we walked towards the welcome billboard, I listened to their conversation as well. The guy claimed he was in the States on a business trip with his co-workers. Said he was from Brazil, but he sounded Slavic. Not saying you can't be Slavic and live in Brazil, just giving the details I noticed. He had a slight tan, very short dark hair and a lean build, maybe 5'10", 6'8". My friend and I are about 5'5", 5'6", but I'm more built muscle-wise. I've been told I look a little intimidating for a woman, which perhaps was a good thing in this situation. My friend asked where his co-workers were, and he claimed they were at the diner across the street, yet he hadn't parked his car there, which I thought was odd. His car was parked closest to the road of the welcome center. My vertigo and headache were completely forgotten, because I was running on pure adrenaline. Everything was happening in slow motion, and my mind was racing with every possible scenario that could happen, so I could mentally prepare myself for what could happen next. When we got to the billboard, he gave my friend his phone, and she took his picture in front of the billboard twice. When he came back to look at the photos and was like, "These are good, nice, thanks so much," he then kept rambling and asking how we liked America, and if we'd ever traveled outside the country before. I was becoming even more uneasy, because we were still just standing there by the road, and I kept glancing to see if any cars were coming. I swear we stood there for like 5 whole minutes before he finally started walking back to his car. In a very slow shuffle, I might add. It was like he was purposefully stalling, and once again kept trying to get behind me. No dice. While his back was turned, I bent to stuff some gravel and sand into my pocket. I wanted every possible weapon at my disposal. We walked a little more, and I bent down again while he wasn't looking to pick up a fist rock and just hid it slightly behind me so he couldn't see it. My mind was already preparing to rationalize beating this guy's skull in if I had to. When we got to the parking lot, my friend and I stopped, and he finally looked back and stopped before glancing back to his car and then at us. He starts rambling again and making more conversation. He didn't urge us to go back to his car, but he was once again stalling. Literally, he'd finish a topic, go quiet for a couple of seconds, and then ask us another question, or bring up another topic to keep us talking. This went on for another 5 minutes, and then I finally said, "Well, we better get back on the road. We're expected." And he looked a little uneasy before finally saying, "Oh, well, okay. Thanks for the help, goodbye." And he turned to walk very briskly to his car. My friend almost headed right for our car, but I stopped her and said, "Wait. I want to make sure he drives off first. Remember, he said his co-workers were at the diner across the street. Plus, I didn't want to run the risk of us getting in our car and being followed." This guy sat in his car for a few minutes, and my friend and I pretended we were talking just in case he was watching us, and then finally, he drove off. We stayed there until we couldn't see his car anymore. Then we went back to our car. Both of us were shaking. Sometimes you just know something is off. My friend said she felt like the guy was going to try and traffic her, and said, "I'm so glad I brought you with me on this trip, because holy shit. You looked like a German shepherd when you sat up in the car when I signaled you." I've never really been in a fight in my life. I've been lucky enough that I've never really had to. I've had close calls, but have always managed to de-escalate a situation before it got physical, and perhaps this was yet another one of those times. But I'd never been more prepared to kill someone if it meant my friend and I could get out of there with our lives intact. I mentally prepared myself to do the unthinkable. Even imagined tossing that guy off the cliff if I had to. It was pretty scary. Needless to say, we both bought ourselves some mace at the next stop. Didn't run into any further problems in our trip, but I'll never forget all the details that happened with that encounter. Something was just off about the way that guy was acting towards us. Who knows? Maybe he was scared of us or me after I stepped out of the car and thought we were about to Thelma and Louise his ass. And that's fine by me. I'd rather a man think twice out of fear before preying on a woman. All of that being said, you go on a road trip. Try to have someone with you if possible and stay alert when you stop anywhere. Keep aware of your surroundings. Keep an eye on the threat. Be prepared to use anything you can at your disposal.